5:34 a.m., Monday, January 10th, 2021. There was a term that Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene used on Timcast IRL that she says she's been throwing around a lot lately that I wish to clarify the meaning of. And rather, I will be describing the actual correct term, which already exists and has for some time, for what she's talking about. She simply has made up a new word for something that she was previously unaware of, and that's totally cool because that means that she independently figured something out. She was throwing out the term corporate communism, and to my mind, corporate communism would be more along the lines of everything to do with the job, the corporation, the product, etc. belongs to the company, not to the customer and not to the employee. When you hear about corporate welfare and such, that would be like corporate socialism, in a sense. Although also corporate socialism would be worker-mandated changes in the company, in theory. But what Representative Greene is referring to when she says corporate communism has a different term. So before I get to that term, which is one of the most potent stop-thought words I have ever encountered, I have to explain what a stop-thought word is. I have to explain a couple of other terms that get tossed around in similar ways and somewhat differentiate between them. So first, what is a stop-thought term? A stop-thought term is a word that is vilified by popular culture or media for the express and sole purpose of causing people who hear such a word to stop thinking. If you've ever had the experience of arguing with somebody and you just say the wrong word about something and they're not hearing it, they're not thinking about it, nothing you say or do is going to make a difference. And if you keep pushing it, they will become angry, possibly even violent. Stop-thought words include things like schizophrenic. They include things like propaganda. The term for what Representative Greene, and you know what? Let me take a step back. It is possible she is aware of the fact that the actual term causes people to simply tune out. My experience has been, even with the smartest people, with the most intelligent, articulate, knowledgeable, educated, and savvy people, you can say the name of what she's actually talking about, not what she's saying, which I will get to that word. And either they will just, I don't know anything about that, I'm not going to talk about it, move on. Or, I've heard that, but I don't know anything about it. And then not attempt to learn anything more about it. See how that works? You can get them to acknowledge it. You can get them to say, I might have heard that word. I've never heard of that. Beyond that, even if you explain what it is, even if you show them existing definitions online, they will shrug. They will not store it in memory. So some associated terms in a similar way they get tossed around. Fascism. Nazi. Authoritarian. Totalitarian. Now, communism is a political philosophy and ideology. It is a method of governing and an economic principle, all unified into one. Typically, communism comes around after the institution of socialism. Socialism is the means by which the previous government and economy and culture are overthrown. But socialism itself is simply not a sustainable practice. That you cannot maintain a society based on purely Marxist principles. It simply doesn't work. The people that are most fervently in favor of it are the people who are least capable of maintaining and providing in this environment. The thing is that in order to get Marxism or socialism enacted or begun, requires, here's a stop thought word, propaganda. It requires deception. It requires useful idiots or useful innocents. What those are people who think that they have the best interest or whatever, that they are wrapped up in whatever cultural aspect makes it hip or cool to be into something like that. And they are the ones who act and fight against what is inherently their own best interest, which is freedom, for something that they think is better than what we have, but is in fact an empty promise based on wholly unrealistic imagined scenarios. The idea that everyone can be provided for, the idea that everyone can be equal on an egalitarian basis, the idea that workers seizing the means of production being enough to grind things to a halt is an equivalent kind of power that could then be applied to running everything. Which is to say, using threats, coercion, and withholding of necessary things in order to force others to acquiesce to your demands is not a sustainable mode of government. It is not a sustainable economic model or policy. Inherently, what happens is the people who fight for the overthrow are not the ones who take power. The ones who take power then see the people who contributed to the overthrow as a threat, and then they get rid of them. This leads to communism. What this means is inherently starting a socialist uprising in the belief that the system will be egalitarian and everyone will be provided for is a good enough idea to get most dumb fucks to just fight for it until the government and the economy are gone. And then they say, okay, we need a new government. Let's build a new government. Well, guess what? The people that know how to govern, you just got rid of them. Corrupt or not, they know how government works. Well, we'll set up our own government with blackjack and hookers, they say. And so they attempt to. And what happens is, in order to keep everyone happy, you have to have one set of rules that everyone follows. You have to have one set of goals. You have to have one set of rewards. And the fact is, with humans, which is to say, in reality, there is no one size fits all. There is no single solution. Now let's go back a little bit to the latest stop thought phrase, the MFP. Because think about it. As soon as you say that word, you say what that word, that acronym stands for, that abbreviation there, and people will automatically accuse you of a particular political ideology. They will recite things that they've been told to believe, because propaganda. They will resist it. It's a stop thought phrase. What happens is somebody forms a government under the auspices of the new revolution, which then almost immediately begins forcing people to do what is necessary to support the system. In the case of Russia, that included locking up and or murdering / starving to death tens upon tens of millions of people. Same with China. At the same time, what happens is the people who are running the new government, who are, that is again to say, not the people who were running the government, so also to say, people who don't actually know how to run a government, begin forcing relocation of people to other industries. So even though you may have a science degree in biology, this does not make you a farmer. Even a botanist and horticulturalist may not be able to farm. In the case of China, they wanted to gather up all of the metal implements that were not being used for anything of any kind, whether they're melting down guns or anything else, and they wanted to conglomerate it And what effectively happened was they achieved what is called pig iron, which is a useless alloy that cannot be separated back into its original components and is effectively a gargantuan waste of time, energy, and materials. But it gave them something to do to feel like they were doing something. Sound like the last couple of years with the whole fascism is a form of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is when a government declares that it is the authority, the arbiter of rules and conduct, behavior, belief, etc. Totalitarianism is an authoritarian system in which the government runs every aspect of your life, tells you what you do, what you don't do, what you can think, what you can't think, what you can say, what you can't say. In the case of China, a legitimate totalitarian country, they mandate vacations, and they say, doesn't matter if you can't afford it, doesn't matter if you're sick, doesn't matter if you got nowhere to go or you don't feel like it, you got a week off of work, you're not getting paid, find somewhere to vacation. And when people get back from vacation, they have these 15-lane highways that get utterly clogged with all the cars. People die waiting to get through the checkpoints back into their cities to get back from vacation. And the ones that don't die, but were late getting back, get punished for being late. This is totalitarianism. There is no winning. Also, it's a bad idea to stand out in a system like that if you're too good at something. This is something pointed out in 1984 with the chess player. If you are too successful, if you are too exceptional, you become a target as well, which means everybody fails to try on purpose. I've heard it best described as the government and military and scientific community of a country like China is composed exclusively of C students. Think about that. George W. Bush was a C student. That's the level of incompetence that they're actually operating with. Fascism is an authoritarian or totalitarian type system based on particular philosophies and principles of a particular group of people. It is kind of like how Marxism is its own thing, fascism is kind of its own thing, but inherently, a couple of hallmarks of fascism are a sense of tradition. There are some kind of cultural traditions being enforced by the totalitarian government, or authoritarian, however you want to look at it, that for the sake of preserving our national pride, our American way, or whatever, we must kill everyone who disagrees, we must lock up all political dissent, and if you don't follow the rules, we will make it impossible to live, which is kind of where we're headed now. Minus really the overt tradition thing. In the case of Nazi Germany, there was a lot of Nordic and Germanic culture that was made prominent. It became part of the symbolism of the various government agencies used Nordic runes. Everything that they did was in the idea of this weird delusional concept that all of them were these, Bavarian warriors or whatever. And keeping up what they considered to be a traditional culture of what they thought it should be. Which, in the case of Nazi Germany, also included really stark, really obvious anti-Semitism, among other things. Ironically, the Communist Party, the Marxists, opposed the Nazi Party. But both parties, had either one gotten into power over the other, would have basically done the same thing. The difference being, perhaps instead of going after Jewish people like the Nazis did, if the communists had taken over, it basically would have been all dissenters. Regardless, in any authoritarian takeover, in any totalitarian formation of government, they begin weeding out the population of dissenters, bad citizens, weak people, however you want to look at it. This often begins with minorities. So all the people talking about minority representation and Marx do not seem to understand that as soon as such a system is put in place, the LGBTQ community, IAP+, or however we're going now, people of color, all would be the first on the chopping block, regardless of whether they supported the revolution. So now we got that out of the way. Tim Pool has described fascism as the marriage of corporate and government power. That the government wants to overstep its bounds, and rather than fight it legally, they find ways of encouraging private business to do so instead. While simultaneously, the private businesses are the ones who are lobbying the government, which means that the private businesses pay money to people in government to pass laws that favor them. So it is that merging that Tim refers to, is that the private corporations and the government has goals that it cannot accomplish legally. The private corporations maybe can do a little bit more for that, but in exchange, we're going to do this, and we're going to throw you some money, and you're going to pass laws that make it so that we can't be sued for a thing that makes people, sick or die, even though we try and mandate it as well, etc. Now here's the thing. Trigger warning. Stop thought word incoming. The big one. The actual name for the socioeconomic and governmental system in which the corporations, shareholders, billionaire oligarchs and such control the government. And in turn, the government attempts to become authoritarian. And because it has limitations based on constitutionality, it then beseeches the private corporations and oligarchs to use every power they can to force as many people as possible through their own private means, as well as setting an example that others then follow like a bunch of mindless jackals. This system has a name. It is not corporate communism. Corporate communism kind of makes you sound like an idiot. Makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. But if you say the real name, people will flat out ignore you, call you crazy, throw out other stop thought words at you to try and make you stop thinking. You'll say this and they'll say, "Are you schizophrenic?" You'll be like, "What does that have to do with anything?" No, I'm not. Are you ready? We've already mentioned totalitarianism. But that is when the government does it from the top down. When a system has the people policing themselves because they don't want to lose their job because their work made the rules that are what the government couldn't do. Meanwhile, as I said, the larger aspects of corporate business world are the ones who are lobbying the government to instigate these things as the government makes them make people do things from the bottom up rather than from the top down. The name of the system is inverted totalitarianism. You can look that up. This is a long-standing term that has existed for a while. And every time you mention it to somebody, they will give you a shrug, their eyes will glaze over, and they will mumble something about, "Oh, I don't know about that," or, "Yeah, I think I heard of that, but I don't really know it," and they will not attempt to learn more. But I've just laid it all out. Because what we are in, what we have actually been in since probably the 60s or 70s at least, and certainly the 80s and 90s, definitely post 9/11, moving forward, it's exponential. The speed at which they are moving is ramping, is curving upward. The system we've been living in, the system I was born into, the matrix of it all, has a name. And that name is inverted totalitarianism. It is inverted because it is not actually from the top. The government does not come top down. The businesses do not necessarily come top down. the propaganda and the at-work rules and such, these OSHA rules, and your company says, well, the government's going to mandate it, so we're going to make the rules, and then the government says, it turns out we couldn't do that, and they stop, but the company's rules are still in place, which is exactly, no exaggeration, no analogy, no metaphor, no attempt to equivalate, is the same. That is what is happening. That is what the Supreme Court is arguing about right now. That is what my employer is fighting against his own franchise company in state Supreme Court about. It is inverted totalitarianism. That is the term. So when you hear Marjorie Taylor Greene say corporate communism, what she is talking about is, in fact, inverted totalitarianism. When you hear Tim Pool say the marriage, or anyone else, the marriage of corporate and government interests for the control of the people is fascism. No, is inverted totalitarianism. Now, the people who are in control, the puppet masters, right? The conspiracy, the real controllers with the money are oligarchs. So there are inverted totalitarian oligarchs. And the inverted totalitarian oligarchy is the system under which we are basically all enslaved at this point. We were born into it, whether we realized it or not. Inverted totalitarianism. Now, yeah, it's a mouthful. It's a lot. It's easier to say fascist. It's easier to say Nazi. And you're not far off when you say that, because they're effectively the same. The difference is, in a country like America, we have a constitution that states that we have rights inherently from birth and lists the ways the government is forbidden from infringing those rights. So when Chief Justice Roberts said, seems like this is all a workaround, you keep saying it's a workaround. What exactly are you trying to work around? The answer to that question is the Constitution, our inalienable rights, which the government is prohibited and forbidden from infringing. Inverted totalitarianism is the name of the game. Yes, they are fascists. Yes, they are effectively Nazis. And when they start rounding people up, segregating populations, and start blaming people for the spread of disease, and telling people why it's so important that we take these not even humans, we won't even consider them fully human, we'll consider them less than human. We'll dehumanize them. We'll demonize them. We'll make them villains in the eyes of the stupid. And then the stupid, who are not with the government, they're just people, will believe it and they will act. In East Germany, they had a group called the Stasi. The Stasi had brown shirts. The brown shirts were the citizen patrols. These were just civilians who were snitches. Inverted totalitarianism. That is what we're dealing with. It's not exactly communism, and no, they're really not pushing us toward communism. In a sense, they're really not even pushing us toward any kind of inverted totalitarian enslavement in the sense of building something, because we're already in it. But as we've heard them speak on building things back better, talking about a big old reset, right? What they're doing is letting this chaos undermine legitimate governments, allowing people to be falsely convinced that their rights don't matter or that their rights are somehow in the way of a greater good. And right there is the big old red flag. That your individual rights, your bodily autonomy, your personal sovereignty, your soul, as it were, is in the way of what they are trying to do. Do I need to say more? Is that a confusing statement? If you don't understand what your rights being in the way of what they're trying to do means, Ask me in the comments, and I will attempt to explain it further. Inverted totalitarianism. Look it up. Learn about it. Get to know it. See it all around you, like Neo seeing Matrix code. It's there. It's everywhere. It's this little device right here.